Welcome back to the post-Breeders' Cup edition of the Friday show, brought to you by Woodbine. This weekend, it's a big graded stakes weekend. On Saturday, the Bessarabian and Maple Leaf Stakes, both graded stakes for fillies and mares. And then on Sunday, the Autumn Stakes for older horses on the main track. I'm Ray Paulick, joined by Editor-in-Chief Natalie Voss, and we have Pat Cummings with us today from the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation. Welcome to the Friday show again, Pat.
Oh, thanks, Ray. Good to be with you again.
Well, Breeders' Cup. There's so much to talk about, but let's talk about we ran a poll asking people what was the big story of the Breeders' Cup. Was it the Japanese horses? Was it Godolphin winning 3? Was it Nick's Go winning the Classic? No. The plurality, not quite the majority, said it was the scratch of modern games in the Juvenile Turf. We don't need to go through what happened. I think that's been covered to death. But really what I'd like to get some ideas here is, what are the take-home lessons from what happened, maybe what should happen going forward as far as any rule changes and anything else? So let me throw it to you first, Pat. What's the number one take-home lesson from what happened on Friday at the Breeders' Cup?
It's a loaded question. There's a lot there. I think the first I would say is you would like to think that the first time you're introduced to fire, it's not when the building is burning down. And that's a little bit what it felt like, I think, on Friday. And the jeers from the crowd, I think, said everything. This was a complete operational failure. It was backed up by a complete loss of confidence in the regulator. And it is still yet to be determined the extent to which there are unknown technological outcomes relative to our betting systems, which is frankly an uncovered part of this, but is, I think, still to be discussed further. And I know it's something I'm working on from a TIF perspective. So there's still plenty to come on that. But overall, I don't know how anyone trusts anything that the CHRB says ever again going forward.
Well, Natalie, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pat.
I mean, that to me is the ultimate takeaway. They have lost confidence, and where we go from here, I really don't quite know. It's a little uncharted territory to see what was said in the aftermath in a press event that they organized, that has subsequently been corrected by them, announcing an investigation that they will conduct. Where the truth resides is very tough to find, and they did not instill confidence in customers at all after the event.
So, Natalie, having listened to what Pat said, and believing that the customers lost confidence in the CHRB and maybe in the system, the horse players came back on Saturday and bet, I think, what amounted to nearly a record amount on the Breeders' Cup races Saturday. So maybe it's not such a big deal.
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time, would it, that we've heard from horse players saying, I'm never betting again. I'm never betting this one track. I'm never betting this jurisdiction. And maybe the people who say that don't actually end up doing it, but somebody sure fills in and puts money through the system in lieu of those people if they are in fact dropping out. So it wouldn't be the first time that we've heard that, for sure.
One thing that drives me crazy is when tracks say, well, we can't do that because the tote system won't allow it. I know a guy that writes code for a living, and he just laughs at answers like that. That this is not really that complicated. When you have a horse scratch, we saw it at the Breeders' Cup on Friday, and we saw it at Grants Pass earlier this week when the lights went out in the last race and they had a big carryover, and they had a different rule, I guess, that applied there, where the last race became an all everybody got every horse, so everybody wins. So what say you, Pat, about this thing that it's too complicated for the system to allow alternate picks and that sort of thing?
It's not too complicated. It's just too expensive, and people don't want to pay for it. That's the reality. I can tell you, as a bettor playing in the Breeders' Cup betting challenge this year, I was sitting with $5,100 that I basically had to bet in the contest on Saturday for races I had already handicapped, and I'm sure most of the other horse players in the building were were sitting there and at home and wherever feeling the same way, they were going to commit their money. The question is, are they coming back on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and going forward? This has definitely exposed some significant flaws in the rules that exist in California and many other states. One place and one set of rules that I think really needs to be discussed is purse money only. That concept promotes owners directly over bettors. And it says there are going to be 2 races here, one for the owners, one for the bettors. But the bettors don't get to participate in that first race where their bets will be in some way, shape, or form potentially impacted by a horse that they cannot wager on. That has to go. And with it will go the coupled entries and all of that. But it's just unthinkable to run a race where that horse could potentially impact the result in some way, shape, or form for bettors. And it does beg the question, is what occurred and the CHRB rule that was in effect to allow modern games to run for purse money only, was that fairest for the largest number of customers? And the answer is absolutely no. It's fair for Godolphin and Charlie Appleby and William Buick, but no one else. It's high time that those rules get amended and changed because it's farcical. This sport exists because of wagering, particularly in California, and the bettors are just tossed aside.
One thing that I noticed almost immediately Friday night was that the three groups that were involved here, Del Mar, the Breeders' Cup, and the California Horse Racing Board, they were all sort of pointing fingers at each other. The Breeders' Cup came out with a statement saying, this is a CHRB matter. We feel bad about it, but it's out of our control. The CHRB said, well, the vet that made the call was working for the Breeders' Cup, which turned out not to be true. He was actually being paid by the racetrack and the Breeders' Cup, I guess, in joint. But he reported to the equine medical director. So I don't know if the 3 parties have sat down in a room together and mended the fences a little bit, but I think they should, because this throwing shade at each other isn't doing anybody any good.
Well, as I recall, we learned in the minutes after the race concluded that the 3 groups were all in a room together having a meeting, and they were in that meeting for an awfully long time before the CHRB sent representatives down to or up to us in the press room. So I would think that they've already kind of circled the wagons on this, and I don't know if they all agreed, okay, if we each point the finger in a different direction, then no one will know who to look at, or if that just sort of emerged after the fact. But yeah, it has been a little bit difficult to get kind of concise answers from the appropriate party, with regards to the wagering issue. But also, I think today we finally got an official update on the assistant starter who was injured. Those of us in the press box didn't even know that he was injured because we couldn't see him from where we were. It was only the people at home watching on TV that informed us that this had taken place. And the reason for the delay was that he had to be sent to a hospital, which is pretty upsetting. And we asked you, Ray, you and I asked different people. I know other members of the media were asking kind of each of these groups, like, hey, is that guy okay? Like, if you can't tell me because of privacy concerns, that's fine. But like, we have people asking us. I had somebody ask me today, whatever happened to him? And it took until now before we kind of eventually got an update. And it was sort of a similar thing. Well, I'm not sure whose job that is to update you on this. And it's like, okay, I just have to answer questions. I'm getting questions from readers that, like, just somebody give me an answer. And we did finally get one about 15 minutes ago, I think.
There was a comment from the CHRB in that Friday evening hastily arranged press gathering that, potentially there were too many cooks in the kitchen, which really fell fairly hollow at the time it was said, and still to this day, because do you remember why there are too many cooks in the kitchen? Why there is such an extreme size to the veterinary team, and particularly a race that was being held in California? You're very right, Ray, in that the finger pointing is highly unsavory, because at the end of the day, there were $8 million that were shifted from potentially winning bettors to those who otherwise would be losing. And it just suggests that the operational policies were not in place to handle these situations appropriately. It also exposes the fact that, generally speaking, like I referenced before on the fire remark, we don't handle communications very well in this business.
No. And
when you don't come out day in and day out and explain reasons why horses are scratched, explain stewards' decisions, explain report on horses who bleed, or why a claim was voided, other than just saying the vet voided the claim. When you don't do that day in and day out, you don't have a whole lot of experience of explaining these things to the public. So when something really goes wrong, you're kind of left really inexperienced in an amateurish position. And again, the rest of the world of racing gives us tremendous examples of how to do this better. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The answers are there. We just have to adapt kind of the global standard for these things, and we could be in a much better position.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think we were let down by really all of the parties involved. The Breeders' Cup, the California Horse Racing Board, and Del Mar. There was really a vacuum of leadership, it seemed like, and nobody, the CHRB tried to step forward, but they never brought the stewards out or the vet that actually were involved in the decisions. So I don't know if they were hiding them from the public, or they just thought, well, we don't want them to have to answer any questions. But let's move on. There's another subject that is that just came up Thursday with the release of the anti-doping protocols for the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. These are draft regulations. They have to be, they're out for public comment right now. Then once they're approved, they go to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, for their comment, and then they're adopted and would go into effect next July at the latest, provided this whole thing is not reversed by the lawsuits against it from the HBPA and some other organizations. Natalie, you've looked at these. What are a couple of the biggest things that you've noticed in terms of changes going forward that horsemen or the public will experience?
Well, it looks like, first of all, these proposed regulations would do away with the kind of tier system that we have now for medications. I think there's 4 classes of medications under the RCI guidelines currently, and they're sort of tapered depending on how much of an effect they could have on performance or whether or not they have therapeutic applications. It looks like that's going to go away. You're either going to have substances that are completely prohibited like EPO, or you're going to have secondary substances like bute that are permitted under certain situations, but not within 48 hours of racing. With the tiered system that we have now, there's also a tiered system of fines and suspensions and penalties that can be levied against a trainer or an owner. It sounds like there's going to be kind of a range for each of those 2 categories of drugs, but it does also kind of seem like there's going to be a lot left up to whoever the arbitrators are as to where in that range they're going to hand somebody a suspension. So I guess in a way that's maybe not actually that different from what we have now, because we do have stewards and commissions that can kind of use a lot of discretion in what they hand to people. So, that's one of the changes. Actually, one of the things that I noticed was how certain things that were not necessarily going to change. I think that people have been assuming that one of the upsides to this new system will be that any drug violations will get decided on fairly quickly. And the flow chart they provided showing you where a case would go and how it would be handled under the new system doesn't really seem to me like it's going to be expediting the process all that much more, other than the fact a trainer who has a pending case for a drug violation is supposed to be suspended while that case is ongoing. Whereas now they typically get stays of suspension until the case is complete, until the appeals are complete. Of course, I don't know whether that suspension can be stayed or appealed. That's sort of not really addressed. So maybe that's going to be really different. Maybe it's not going to be really different. But lots to think about in this new system for sure.
Pat, what struck you as progressive or different here?
Yeah. Speaking about, how poorly generally American horse racing operators and regulators communicate, I was very impressed with the display of communications by USADA, who, mind you, still does not have a contract as enforcement agent for this authority, but that's a whole nother story, and one that they addressed that should be forthcoming. But the actual documentation, the flow charts, as Natalie called them, the graphics that they put out, I think are very clear, straightforward, helpful, informative. It's a kind of a breath of fresh air, to be honest, a very, very clean palette of information. So that I think is helpful. The second was the reaffirmation of the whereabouts policies. These were flagged up in some previous interviews with you guys, with TDN, done by Tessa Muir and the team at USADA. And I know TIF went into them a little bit about what is actually in a whereabouts policy for human athletes. And they have reaffirmed what is going to be required for horse people, trainers, and the requirement on owners too. When horses are not active in training at the racetrack, the owner becomes the ultimately responsible person. And they admitted fully that this is not going to be operational on day one. This will be phased in. But there is a very clear organizational burden that is going to fall back on owners and trainers to report where their horses are more or less at all times on a daily basis. They have to indicate a place where their horse is going to be and can be tested and can be reached at any hour of the day. This is a huge step forward. It is seemingly, they seem to be doing a good job communicating it thus far. And I think it is a hopeful and a positive indicator for the future.
It's going to be interesting to see how much staffing is going to be required to do that. There's tens of thousands of horses in training, so it's a big job. A couple of the things that I noticed, the way the system now works, you're notified of a violation. They set up a hearing. You have a hearing with the stewards. The stewards, you're allowed to present evidence. The stewards issue a ruling. You appeal it. It goes on forever. The way they've got it structured here is it says under the proposed equine protocol, if USADA and the covered person, which would be the trainer, do not mutually agree on a resolution and sanction terms, the case is submitted to an impartial arbitrator. So they're expecting that the vast majority of cases will be agreed upon that, yeah, I have a violation, so I'm going to accept whatever you give me. That's just so different than the system that we now have. And I guess the reason they think this is going to work is that to become, to be allowed to participate, you have to register with the authority. And when you register, you agree to abide by the rules, one of which is the arbitration process. So it's in the very beginning that I think will be a real eye-opener for a lot of the people. The other thing I noticed is that Natalie talked a little bit about the dissolution of the class 1, 2, 3, 4 type of things. So every anti-inflammatory will be considered a performance-enhancing drug that will result in a disqualification. And if you get 4 of the mildest anti-inflammatories over a 5-year period, you could be suspended up to 2 years. Now, there are a lot of trainers right now that treat butte overages as like parking tickets or something, and they collect them that way. That's really going to be a change for some of these operations that are a little sloppy.
Yeah, and if that sloppiness, Ray, were to spread across to just not reporting on a regular basis where your horse is, or your horse not being in a regular place, I mean, if you have trouble or if you collect butte overages as parking tickets, imagine what's going to be the situation if you're not reporting where your horse is on a regular basis, because they've made it clear, I think, based on the number of horses you have in training, what those infractions will be. I think it's for trainers that have fewer than 30 or 50 horses. Right. 3 whereabouts policy violations will yield a suspension, and then over 50, I think it goes to 6. But it is going to be a burden. It's going to require much greater organization from trainers. One other thing I would note is that it's made very clear race day violations equal automatic disqualification. The system we have in place today seems very tilted in favor of trainers constantly trying to work the system, the variance in states, and playing out the system as long as they can. And sometimes it does lead to things being overturned, but it's fairly unthinkable in the rest of the world that if you have an overage on a race day from a race, that you just never keep the race. That just never falls in the favor of the horse, that there's always at least that disqualification. It's made very clear in these initial set of rules that's going to be a disqualification across the board. Right. And again, a step forward.
Natalie, closing thoughts on this?
Well, I think what I think Pat mentioned, when a horse is not in active training, it falling to the owner to report where the horse is if it's not with the trainer. Like, I also think that's going to be a big sort of cultural shift for racing, because currently owners are able and perfectly truthful, I think, to say, well, I mean, I don't know what the trainer's giving the horse. I'm not out there every day. I don't even know. I don't know how to train horses. And so it will be interesting to me to see how owners respond to this, because there's like some elements on this medication side of things, so there could be more on the racetrack safety side of things when those proposed regulations come out, that are going to kind of creep a little bit more responsibility towards the owners for what's going on with their animals. And, I personally welcome that. I feel like in other horse sports, even if you're not the one riding the horse every day, you are supposed to understand what is going on with it. And so claiming that you can't be punished because you're ignorant of what's happening doesn't really fly in other places in the horse sport world so much. So it would be kind of nice actually to see not just trainers having to become more organized and reporting where their horses are, but also owners having to take a little bit more of an interest in what's going on to avoid, violations. I think that would ultimately be a good thing for us too.
And let's not forget, these are just draft regulations at this point. However, they were written in consultation with a lot of ownership groups, trainers. They were not written in a vacuum. So I don't think we're going to see major changes from these going forward. At least that's what that's my opinion on it. And this is on a fast track. We're in November now. These have to go to the FTC, I think, next month, and for approval. And if all goes well, and if the court challenge does not stop it, this will go into effect next July. At least a lot of this will. So, Pat, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for advocating on behalf of horse players with the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation. Really appreciate your being here today.
Thanks to both of you, and a pleasure to be back.
We'll be right back after taking a look at this week's Woodbine Star of the Week.
Pink Lloyd on the inside and Super Hot. They're neck and neck. Pink Lloyd asks for a little bit more. Down the centre, Dundrum, and out wide, Forrester's Fortune takes a shot. Asked to rally now. Pink Lloyd on the inside in front and opens to a now half a length lead over Super Hot, who clings on. Pink Lloyd a neck in front, and Pink Lloyd on the inside has won a 25th stakes race at 9 years of age and did all he had to do without really having exerted a little bit more than expected, but did it well enough. Super Hot second. Third on the outside was Told It All. But there's history in the making again with Pink Lloyd.
'25th stakes win. 28th win overall out of 36 starts for Pink Lloyd. Hey, this guy, he's got no quit in him. Hey, the interesting thing, Natalie, is that Pink Lloyd, a lot of the times he'll come from off the pace. In this particular race, he battled for the lead all the way down on the inside, which is really not where he probably wanted to be. And Super Hot gave him quite a challenge. But in the end, I thought he drew off, it was a narrow win, but he wasn't being asked for everything he's got. So he's maybe something left in the tank. I don't know if there's another race for him in the book, but Pink Lloyd, how about him?
He's just been so much fun to watch, and people who are based at Woodbine, I think, really treat him like a celebrity. I noticed that when I was up there, gosh, maybe like 3 years ago now, when he was still running, of course. And he's a really good example of a horse that really likes his job.
Yeah, 3 years ago when he was just a mere child of 6, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't read Robert Tiller's plans for him for next year, but if he's sound and still competitive, why not bring him back, right?
He looked happy enough there.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Friday Show, brought to you by Woodbine. Some great stakes there this weekend. 2 on Saturday, 1 on Sunday. Be sure to tune in. And thanks to Pat Cummings of the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation for sharing his thoughts on what went wrong and what we can learn about the scratch at the Breeders' Cup, and also a little preview of the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority's new anti-doping and medication protocols. That's it for this week. Thanks, Natalie, for joining us as well. We'll see you next week.